Good morning. Welcome to this live stream. I'm delighted to be with Michael Ruse and Bill Dembski for the 20-year anniversary of their anthology, Debating Design from DNA to Darwin. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Morning, Sabur.
Professor Ruse, you're looking a little bit unwell, and before the stream, you wanted to explain that you're not as unwell as you come across. So could you just give us a bit of an update on your health?
There we are. Well, I have idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which I control with a very strong drug. But I got pneumonia last year, and it leaves me with some breathing problems. But I'll be fine for this. Don't worry.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, so we'll begin off with something I think quite light, just to introduce the topic. If both of you were given the opportunity to have a second edition of this brilliant landmark book from 2004, where would you place the debate and how would you see it progressing in the last 20 years? So maybe we can begin off with Professor Ruse.
Well, I think what I would do more is not attack Bill or other intelligent designers straight on. In fact, I debated with Michael Behe 3 months ago in Poland. But I would be more interested in saying the kind of agnosticism come religious beliefs that I've got, and I think that's fair to say, are the kind that don't really care too much about the actual, I mean, I do care about the workings of evolution, but I'm not too bothered about where, if at all, God comes into it, because for me, that's not where the crux lies. I want to argue more for if I say mystical, I mean, I grew up as a Quaker, so that fits because they're big on mysticism. But what do they call it? I'm an apophatic theologian. In other words, I can say what God is not. He's not somebody who looks like me or like you. Actually, he looked more like you than like me, but I don't think God is like that. So apophatic theology says, I know what God is not. It doesn't mean to say I'm being negative about this. It's just that, as JBS Haldane used to say, I think the world is not only queerer than I think it is, but it's queerer than I could think it is. And I take that very seriously. There you go.
Thank you for that answer, Professor. Bill?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's much to do with the book, except if a second edition were to be done, get some new people, talking about just where things have gone with the debate. I think of, for instance, the whole dysteleology problem. That seems to be getting a lot of play these days. But I guess I would say also that I never thought of the book as principally a theological tract. Yes, the theistic evolution was represented there, but it seemed that for me, the prime interest was always what is the evidence for various forms of evolution and intelligent design? And so that, I think, was addressed in the book. I think there's a lot of updating to be done there, but in terms of, I think, some of the philosophical or theological considerations, I'm not sure that there's that much more to be said. I mean, for instance, I'm looking at, Michael, even though he looks like he's suffering, he certainly, his output is voluminous. I see 4 or 5 books just in the last 3 years, and so there was a book that he just did in 2023, Understanding the Christianity Evolution Relationship. Well, he had done a book in 2000 with Cambridge, Can a Darwinian Be a Christian? And in it, he wrote, Darwinism is a theory committed to the ubiquity of law. I assume that he still holds to that. And by ubiquity of law, he explained what that means for Christianity. He wrote, even the supreme miracle of the resurrection requires no law-breaking return from the dead. Come again? Well, he explains, one can think of Jesus in a trance, or more likely that he really was physically dead, but that on and from the third day, a group of people hitherto downcast were filled with great joy and hope. Close quote. I mean, that may be a form of Christianity, but it's certainly not anything that would be traditional or Orthodox Christianity. And I assume, Michael, you still would hold to that. You mentioned being somewhat mystical now in your older age, but it seems to me, everything I've seen is that you're still committed to the ubiquity of law, and that the resurrection, that it has no more traction with you than it did back then.
Well, I think that's a very good point to home in on. I guess, again, it's my Quaker background which influences me here. But as far as I'm concerned, the physical resurrection, it's going to sound to you heresy. As far as I'm concerned, the physical resurrection is not a big thing. What's a big thing for me is that on that Sunday, there were 12 men, or 11, I guess, sitting around, absolutely despondent. They thought that they had the leader, the Messiah, or whatever it was, and they'd seen on the Friday him being, put to death in the most horrible way. And here they were, absolutely despondent. And then suddenly, within their hearts, they said, "I know that my Redeemer liveth." And obviously they did. And for the rest of their lives, which several of them were cut short, they just stuck with that, as did Paul. So for me, the resurrection is not a physical thing. It's that feeling within oneself that God lives. Now, if I can say one more thing, and then I'll let it over to others. This, to a certain extent, is bound up with my feelings as I get older about the body-mind problem. Frankly, having been a philosopher for 60 years, I'm amazed at how much we can't do. And one of the things we can't do, I don't think, is explain why molecules can think. But, if anything, I'm what they call a panpsychic monist. I think it's neither physical nor spiritual, but somehow a combination of both. So for me, the resurrection, if you like, at one level, is as physical as it ever could be or needs to be. So, but what I want to say is, what's really important for me is that those disciples suddenly felt within their hearts, he lives. And that for me is all you need.
Well, that's not enough for me, as you can imagine. And what I see here is a certain asymmetry. In the sense that Christianity is bending to your Darwinian and materialistic viewpoint, or now panpsychic viewpoint, but I don't really see the Darwinian position bending in any way. And this is, I think, for me, that's really the fundamental question. It's a science question, a science versus science, as opposed to science versus religion, or religion versus religion. What's the evidence for evolution in a materialistic sense, and is there a place for intelligence in the emergence and subsequent history of life? And can we know that? Are there ways of detecting that? Is there reason to think that Darwin didn't hit the nail on the head?
You use the word materialistic. Now, I think Dan Dennett is a materialist. I think Jerry Coyne is a materialist. So there's two people that I respect, but I think they are materialists. I'm not sure that I want to call myself a materialist in that sense. Because a materialist thinks that you can get mind out of material, whether it's emergence or whatever. And I just don't see putting molecules together in a certain state is going to guarantee you that they're going to start thinking. So I'm much more with, William Kingdom Clifford at the end of the 19th century said, given the sort of continuity from blobs up to humans, he didn't see that there was a way of separating mind and body. And I guess I'm influenced by that. So I'm not a spiritualist. I'm certainly not, a believer like you are, Bill. But I'm uncomfortable with being called a materialist because I'm not sure I am that. As I say, I'm more into apophatic theology, which basically says, I know what the bloody hell I am.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a whole tradition with apophatism. So it's that we can speak of God through negations, but I'm not sure even the claim God is properly spoken of through negations, it seems, is not a negation. So I don't think you can take apophatism, as the be all and end all of theological discussion.
I don't think it is either, because as I've said, I think there are genuine questions which we haven't answered. I think, why is there something rather than nothing? What Heidegger calls the fundamental question of metaphysics. And I think the body-mind, why can molecules think? I think that these are genuine questions, genuine problems, and I don't think we know why the bloody hell what the answer is. I just don't know. And except I know that Dan Dennett's answers are not.
Yeah.
So that's
actually, I mean that's refreshing to hear you say that, Michael. I was at a tech conference recently where I spoke, but Ray Kurzweil spoke, and he takes very much this materialistic line that it's that we are basically mechanisms, that we're computers made of meat. So it's so that's at least you allow some level of something beyond that. Although to say how that molecules, we don't understand how they think, even that seems to presuppose something. There's I would say a tacit materialism there, because it could also be that our physical systems are in some ways receivers. It can be you can use a radio metaphor, and so it's not that our minds so much are thinking. It's that they are receiving, as it were, information that is then being processed or transmitted. So I think there are lots of different metaphors and ways of thinking about this. And even there, I would say, it's refreshing to hear that you're not in the strict materialist camp of a Dan Dennett, but it seems to me that you are still held in its thrall to some degree.
Well, I'm still, yeah, but I'm also perhaps to some degree held. I don't know whether it's yours, but Alistair McGrath and other people like that I respect. Certainly, I'm held by them to a certain extent. But you take the computer analogy. Actually, I'm speaking now to you on a new laptop which I bought just before Christmas. It came, and there it was, and I sat and looked at it. It didn't look at me. But then I had to phone the chap on campus who does these things, a friend of ours, who came over and got the thing running. Now, the point is, it got it running because he was able to put, ideas, meaningful things into it to get it to work. So I don't think, if you say we're computers, I don't think that solves the body-mind problem, because computers only work if you've had some thinking being as it were, program them. So
sure.
If we're just computers, then we're just sitting or there, and we're dead. We're not doing anything.
Now, the people like Kurzweil will always have an answer. I mean, these computers sit in environments, they interact with each other, and the technology improves. We now have deep learning, machine learning. So this is supposed to bootstrap it. So there's a whole story. I mean, everybody can always tell a narrative. And,
Well, you see, don't forget, I was born an Englishman. So I recognize that, everything is improvement until we get to me, particularly Americans. So, but no, I as I say, that's where I'm at. I'm not a materialist, because I think if materialist means being Dan Dennett, then it's just not true.
Okay, fair enough.
Go on, someone get us going again.
Yeah. So, I have.
We used to do this. Have a roadshow debate. I think we did about 5 debates at different colleges and universities in the early 2000s. So this is a good time.
It is. It is. So, Professor Ruse, would you?
May I just say, Bill?
Yeah.
I find it a lot easier debating with you than debating with Michael Behe. Somehow, I have a feeling. I don't. Well, I do mean this critically. I have a feeling that Michael is dogmatic, whereas I think you know, you're a very nice guy who's mistaken. Let's put it that way. Yes.
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to feel gratified, but anyway, we'll let
So,
that go.
okay, so I'll move on to the next question. Professor Ruse, would you accept that in researching biological life, the notion of design and a constellation of related ideas such as purpose, function, etc., actually helps scientists discover new facts in biology? That is, on some level, design as a conceptual framework is tapped into even within evolutionary research.
That's a very good question. And Bill used the word teleology or function or something. And of course, my eyes, you know, or my ears pricked at that, because I'm sure you would know, you know, 5 years ago, I wrote a book on purpose. So this is something which engaged me. What I want to say is the following, is I think that Plato and Aristotle, right down to Archdeacon Paley, were right. There's something about organisms which is not to be found in lumps of rock or something like that. And the answer is, excuse me, they function, they work, they are, excuse me, they are as if designed. Now, of course, what Plato said is that there was a designer, that, you know, the form of the good. What Aristotle said is, God knows, but at some level, he was almost like in an alarm vital or something. There's a sort of a force driving us to the ultimate being. So I, obviously, somebody like Paley wanted to say it was the Christian God. So I am absolutely 100% with those who want to say the world is, or the organic world is as if designed. And there are people who deny this. I mean, I think Michael Gieslin would be one. I mean, I think Michael Gieslin would be one who says, no, there's no design and Darwin is enough. Whereas somebody like Jim Lennox, who I agree with, says, oh no, there is design. The question is, how do we explain it? If you want to use materialist, how do we explain it in terms of, let's say, in a naturalistic way? Let me use the word naturalistic. And I think that's what the greatness of Darwin is, that he solved it. That natural selection says that, you know, our eyes didn't just happen. Eyes are here because they worked in the past and they work now. And so my feeling is that Darwin's soul, as I like to say, Darwin completes the scientific revolution, because what Kant said, you'll never find a Newton at the blade of grass. And I think Darwin was the Newton at the blade of grass. So I am certainly one who wants to say that I see teleology in the world. But of course, the whole point is, as I say for Darwin, with the Darwin thing, I don't think this is necessarily implies a designer with a capital D. And of course, Darwin himself came to think that too. So on the other hand, if you like, Cardinal Newman, what did he say? I believe in design because I believe in God. I don't believe in God because I believe in design. And I'm quite happy for somebody like Bill to say, yes, I see the work of my creator in, let's say, looking at the eye or something which is a marvel of a marvel of organic design. So I'm quite comfortable with Bill wanting to say, well, I think this didn't happen by chance. But I think for somebody like me, I can say, here it is. I can give a naturalistic explanation of it. Whether there's anything beyond that, well, that's my apophatic theology. I think that's a question I can't answer. All I can say is that whatever okay, this is something positive. We have design, but I want to say we can do it. Darwin did it naturalistically for us. Whether somebody like Bill wants to say yes, but naturalism didn't just happen. We have to have something equivalent to the Platonic form of the good. And incident, far from being sneering about that. I mean, I am absolutely 100% positive, even if I don't believe in it. So I do think it's open for somebody like Bill to say, yes, I see design here. But I would be more comfortable with Newman's thing. I see design because I see God, rather than I see God because I see design. There you are. I've done enough talking.
Thank you for that, Professor Ruse. So over to you, Bill. The question is, how does one's philosophical presumptions about randomness affect the way they view Darwinism and intelligent design? So here I'm sort of prodding you to your paper, the 1991 paper, Randomness by Design.
Right. Well, let me key off of what Michael was just saying, because, I mean, if we use design in terms of function or appearance of purpose, he also used the expression as if designed. We, as biologists, we have to treat things as if designed. But there is no actual design there in the sense of an intelligent cause. Michael talks about the Platonic good bringing about the design. But I mean, for Plato, it was an architect, that had to implement the design, a demiurge finally. And I think that becomes the question. Not so much design in a broad functional sense, but design as in a causal power that brings it about. And for Michael, he does not need a causal power, an intelligent cause to bring about the forms, the organic forms that we see, because the Darwinian mechanism does that. And so he also said, well, it's not just chance, but so the Darwinian mechanism, when you try to represent it mathematically, it is a stochastic process. So it's not brute chance. It's not that you're just flipping a coin, but there is this up and back between natural selection, picking things out that are somehow fitter or whatnot, and then also some form of random variation. And that random variation, it's called random because it's not looking to some sort of future outcome. It's things that are happening in the moment, chance-based processes, but it's that chance is being winnowed through by natural selection. And I would say the question is whether that process is actually able to do all of that sort of design work that Michael says it can. And I think that's a theoretical and empirical question. We just did a second edition of the design inference. And, one of the exercises in the book, I worked with a computer scientist, Winston Ewart, who's my co-author, and we took the 200,000 words that are in Unix spell checker. And we asked, can we evolve one word into another by simply adding a letter, dropping a letter, or randomly modifying a letter? And so at every point, you have to stay within that vocabulary. So that's the analog with natural selection. You have to stay functional. You can't just lose function and die. And it turns out that you don't have unlimited evolutionary connections. From the letter A, you can get to a lot of words. You can get to tips, drops, whatnot, but you can't get from the word A to the word Nazi or from A to the word Constantinople by this process of evolution. So there's a definite fact of the matter whether there's enough evolutionary interconnectedness among organisms so that you can actually get from one to the other via a Darwinian process, or change it, add genetic drift, symbiogenesis, evo-devo, but it becomes, there are theoretical and empirical questions about the adequacy of that evolutionary model. Michael, and I've known him since 1992, there was a conference at SMU where he was keying off of Philip Johnson, and I don't think he's ever changed his view, which is that the Darwinian mechanism is adequate and that intelligent design is unnecessary and unproven. So I think that's where we are. You mentioned the randomness by design article. That's what got me going on these questions, really, which was the nature of randomness and design, and how one way to make sense of randomness is as a foil to design. But I'm not sure that's in terms of the discussion with Michael, this seems to be more the real question. Intelligent causation, is it required in the explanation of life's emergence and subsequent history. How can we know that? How do we know that the Darwinian mechanism, perhaps supplemented by other naturalistic mechanisms, is adequate? I would suggest that it isn't. And again, I would say this is a science versus science controversy. The philosophy is interesting, but I believe in design for, I guess I could say, two reasons. I am a Christian, so I believe that God created the world by design, but there are theistic evolutionists who will say that God used the Darwinian method. But then I also believe in design as an intelligent causation, because I think the evidence is much better for the actual design, the actual intelligent causation of living organisms, rather than their emergence through some sort of naturalistic process that, when left to itself, gives no evidence of intelligent causation.
Thank you for that answer, Bill.
Is it one thing? Can I just jump in?
Of course.
With your word analogy thing, and you said what, you can't get to Constantinople. Well, I'm not sure that we can get to the Archangel Bill. In other words, Dembski with wings, who's capable of flying around the room or flying wherever it might be. I'm not too, maybe I'm missing something here. Because I don't think that natural selection can necessarily do everything, or even everything of an understandable living kind. So we're not talking about whether natural selection could build the Eiffel Tower. We're asking about whether natural selection could produce Pegasus, a horse with wings. And it hasn't. And I'm not sure, my betting is that it can't. So I'm not, why should I be worried about the example that you just gave us, that you can get from to a lot of words, but you can't get to, what was it, Nazi? But you
Nazi,
can't get.
I mean, there are lots of words, four-letter words, and then Constantinople happens to be one as well. I bring that up because that was an example Laplace, I believe, gave, of what you can't get by chance. But the point isn't so much, are there islands of functionality that are inaccessible? But in most cases they are. From a Darwinian perspective, there's common descent, universal common ancestry, and there's all this evolutionary connectedness. And there is, I would say, no evidence, for instance, if you look at the Cambrian, that these Cambrian phyla are connected by evolutionary pathways. The fossil record is bereft of these evolutionary connections. So why do we think that they have to exist? It seems the evidence isn't there, and this is an analogy that I gave, but there are cases where we can try to run evolution and we can see that the evolutionary connectedness simply isn't there. We can prove it, mathematically, or we can exhaust the search. We can't do that in biology because the search space, the biological configuration space, is just too massive. So it's an analogy. So I don't think it really, I don't think your point about Pegasus, or that there are things, I think Darwinists would agree that there are certain types of things that just wouldn't evolve. But of the things that do exist, the biological systems that do exist, all of them are connected, according to the Darwinian view. And it seems to me that there's no good evidence for that.
Hang on. What about Archaeopteryx? You've got reptiles on the one hand, you've got birds on the other. You couldn't have two animals, in my opinion, which are more different between, let's say, some kind of lizard and, let's say, a red-winged blackbird. And yet Archaeopteryx, it exists. It's a reptile with feathers. So there are intermediates. And as you well know, Bill, there are lots more intermediates than just that. That they're always turning up intermediates. So I'm not quite so worried about this as you seem to be. Are you saying that the fossil record is such that it could as easily bear God getting involved every Friday afternoon and saying, "Okay, it's time to create another, 10 organisms," as it were. Is that a possibility?
I think anything there is a logical possibility. What actually happened? That's a good question. Is it an evolutionary process from an intelligent design perspective? Could it be an evolutionary process that's in some ways programmed, where massive changes happen suddenly? That's could all be built in. I don't think we're at that point where we can say, exactly how it happened, but it does seem, for instance, when you point to Archaeopteryx, let's say it is an intermediate. I've seen people on my side who've been critical, but let's say it is or it has intermediate features. The thing is, from a Darwinian perspective, you need a step-by-step process that can get you from point A to point B to point C. And what I see is still a lot of discontinuity, but leaving that aside, reptiles, birds, they're vertebrates. What happens when we look at fundamentally different body plans? A starfish, an insect, a chordate, a slug, whatever. You have all these different body plans. There's no evidence of any sort of evolutionary connection, but there has to be on Darwinian grounds. So what do we do with that?
Well, what about human evolution, Bill? Let's say, what was it? 6 million years ago, the monkeys or the apes got out of the trees and went on the prairies, and from then on down to Homo sapiens. Now we've got one hell of a lot of evidence supporting this, and of course it's not just fossil evidence; it's DNA evidence as well, that you can see how these things would happen and those sort of things. Are you saying that there's no physical or whatever it is evidence to support the idea that 5-6 million years ago we all looked like philosophy graduate students? That's a joke, but you know what I mean. And then we've come all the way to, God forbid, to Philip Johnson and Bill Dembski and Michael Behe. Now, are you saying there's no evidence for this, that it's just as reasonable to think that God was, as I say, every Friday afternoon saying, "Okay, folks, it's time for Homo, Heidelbergiensis," or something like that? Go on.
I think when you put it that way, every Friday, humans will implement designs. I was just reading a biography of Elon Musk. Not every Friday, but there are a lot of bursts of creativity. I'm sorry?
Thank you, Bill. If you're spending your time reading biographies of Elon Musk, you've got too much time on your hands, but go on. My wife would kill you.
I don't know about that. He's a fascinating character. So I think just what the designer decides how he or she or it wants to implement the design is up to the designer, and I think there are lots of different metaphors. I think that we could use to understand the nature of the design. If it's kind of a mechanical design, then that every Friday that may seem, shouldn't you automate it? Shouldn't you put it all together in some more conventional evolutionary framework? But there's one view of design is where God interacts with the world as a musical instrument. So there is an appropriateness to, this is a notion of a design argument that goes back to Gregory of Nazianzus, a church father. So, it seems to me, to put it in terms of every Friday, it's just kind of makes it look ridiculous. I don't know human evolution all that well. I would suggest Sabur have Casey Luskin on sometime. He's a paleontologist. I think he knows much more about this. It seems to me that just connecting apes and humans because of DNA evidence is not very convincing. So, and I personally, I don't hold to common descent. Okay, so I just don't see the evidence. I would like to hold to common descent because I think conceptually it's a lot cleaner, but I just don't see the fossil evidence supporting that. So I'm not sure what to make of human evolution. But I think if humans evolved from ape-like ancestors, it wasn't through a process of Darwinian evolution. I think it would be more of a programmed evolution. So even there you'd have design in a way, a palpable way that we don't have in your view.
Could I ask a related question to both of you, which is, if life evolved naturally, or if there was intelligence involved at some level, an agnostic to both of your positions could say there is no way to distinguish intelligent design from naturalistic design because we don't know what the designer's intent was.
When you say naturalistic design, I mean, are you thinking of even something like a directed panspermia, as long as the designer is somehow embodied in physical stuff, or are we?
So let's just stick with the blind watchmaker argument that nature is giving the appearance of design as opposed to actual design. So the question an agnostic could ask both of you is, how could you distinguish between actual intelligent design and what appears to be intelligent design? Because in the case of the former, we don't know the mind of the intelligent designer. So how could we distinguish between what is design and what is the appearance of design?
Yeah, I don't know in terms of with the mind of the intelligent designer. I mean, you take, for instance, Craig Venter's synthetic genomics, where he will embed linguistic terms, his own initials into DNA. If we happen to look at some new organism, go into its DNA, and then through some simple coding scheme say, we find in there made by Yahweh, and then we find the first, chapter of Genesis in there. I mean, that would be very convincing that some designer had put that in there. And if we could rule out that a human had done that, that would be evidence of intelligence, regardless of whether we know what the purpose of that intelligence is. I mean, it's, this is a common thing in archaeology where you find things, you don't really know what the purpose was, and yet we can tell that there was a purpose, presumably, that there is a product of intelligence. But I think when it comes to biological systems, we're looking, I think there's the question of the design as, the purpose, what the function that it's exhibiting. But then there's the question of the process that brought it about. And it seems to me, that's where the action is, we wouldn't be having this discussion if the Darwinian mechanism was a slam dunk for explaining the sort of biological complexity that we see. And I think from my view in the last 20, 25 years, that since Michael and I have been debating, the problems have gotten worse. I mean, you find, for instance, junk DNA was all the rage about 20 years ago. Junk DNA is dead. But it's not just that junk DNA is dead on account of the ENCODE project, but now we're finding information density inside the genome, where you've got reverse palindromes, where basically you have a word that reads, you can code moving forward or backward. So a palindrome is something that reads the same going one way as another. But reverse palindrome is where you have meaning going both ways. So desserts, for instance, is, what is it? Desserts stressed is what it reads the other way. And we seem to find these now. So there's this information packing, this information density that seems to be now in the DNA. So from my vantage, how does that come about? And is the Darwinian mechanism or some additional naturalistic mechanism adequate to explain that? And it seems to me that it isn't. And on the other hand, we create crossword puzzles. We create instances where we pack more information than we would normally expect to find. So that seems to me, you can say, well, it's an analogy. Well, fine. But, it does seem to me compelling evidence, at least to be thinking in terms of design, in terms of some real design as in intelligent causation, an architect, somebody that's bringing purpose to it externally, as opposed to where this is just emerging through some sort of unguided process.
Thank you for that, Bill. Over to you, Professor Ruse.
Yeah, can I just interrupt?
Sure.
I'm starting to find this conversation actually more revealing and useful than I thought it would be, because the more I listen, excuse me, the more I listen to Bill, the more I've got the feeling that he and I really aren't arguing against each other. I have that feeling when I'm talking to Michael Behe. I mean, I really feel that one of us is black and one of us is white. I've got my options on which, but whereas somehow I just don't feel I'm arguing with you, Bill, because seriously, if I were, then the first thing I do when I put this down, I'm going to the opera this afternoon, so I wouldn't, but would be to say, oh my God, let's, Google junk DNA and let's look at it and find out whether Bill's right or whether Bill's wrong or how I could answer that. And somehow I have no inclination whatsoever to do this. Now, is it because I think you've won? No. Is it because I kind of feel at a certain level that that's not where the action should be? I think that's true. I would be much more inclined if you said, oh, well, why don't you look at what Rufus Jones wrote about mysticism or something like that? I could see that might be a useful thing for me to do. So in other words, at some level, if you're right, I'm not going to be devastated. I mean, yeah, I'm going to be sorry for all my evolutionist friends. I'm going to be sorry for myself, but yeah, I mean, let's be fair about this. Don't go off and say, "Oh, Michael Ruse is now a creationist," because he bloody isn't. But if it turned out that you were right, would I be absolutely, floored, devastated in a way that I think Richard Dawkins would be? And I've got a suspicion I wouldn't be, because that's not where my worries are. I talk about opera. One of the things that makes me stop and say, I don't think I could ever be a Dawkins atheist, is I find incredibly great works of art. Somehow I can't feel that they're all for nothing. When I hear, let's say, Sarastro in the Magic Flute, for me, that transcends anything. Or when I didn't go to see the last Vermeer exhibit, but I did see one, 25 years ago. And when I'd seen these paintings, I just said, this really is spiritual, supernatural. I cannot bring myself to believe that, that it's absurd, as Sartre said. Somehow it transcends that for me. Or great poetry again. Somehow for me, it's. Let me say, John Donne, his thing, no man is an island. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. God, I find that so moving and so wonderful. I can't somehow, there's a part of me which says this cannot be absurd in Sartre's sense, or Camus' sense rather, that it has to be meaningful somewhere. I'm not sure that I'm right, but at least that's the sort of thing which makes me pull back from being, as I say, a Dawkins atheism. And apart from this, I cannot stand his cockiness, but that's another matter. I've never been that self-assured. I'm a philosopher. Anything which looks good, I'm going to start worrying about. Seriously, I do feel that at some level, I'm not arguing with you, or at least I am, but that's not where I want the argument to be. As I say, when I was talking to Michael Behe out in Krakow, I did feel, yeah, we really are, opposing each other, and I just don't get that feeling with you. You're going to go home and you're going to say, "Oh my God, my life's a failure. Michael Ruse thinks I've got something worthwhile to say."
Well, I am mildly shocked. This is true.
I enjoyed doing this book. And when people come to me and say, "How on earth could you have done this with Bill Dembski?" I say, I had more fun, and I think he had more fun than I've had on any other project. Go on.
Well, I think we're both having fun, But let me perhaps make I think you've made something of a concession, and I could make something of a concession as well. I mean, I became a Christian. I was, I think I was some sort of loose theist before that, but it was in 1979. But what brought me to Christianity was not the sense that evolutionary theory was problematic and that I couldn't explain how life arose. My dad was a PhD biologist. He taught evolutionary theory at the community college where he was teaching. So evolutionary theory was something I grew up with. It simply was not a consideration in my conversion to Christianity. So that's, and I think to this day, I could make my peace with Christianity as a theistic evolutionist. But for me, the issue is the evidence and the theoretical considerations over how life arose and how life came to be in all its diversity and complexity. So that's crucial for me. In this debate, what is the actual science saying? And yet, if it were shown to me that the Darwinian mechanism has all the power, the creative power that's been ascribed to it, I think I could make my peace with that. As a Christian, theistic evolutionists have done it, and yet, I just don't see that the evidence. I think the evidence is stronger on the intelligent design side. So that's where I land.
To say that you grew up as an evolutionist, but not a Christian. My experience was exactly the opposite. Growing up in England in the 50s. I mean, I went to a Quaker school, so of course I was immersed in Christianity. But I also was growing up in England, and biology was not for deep thinkers. If you were any good, then at A level you did math, physics, and chemistry, which I did really proudly. I never ever took a biology class after taking, natural history or something when I was 13 or 14. In England, if I can say, bright kids, I don't know how it's changed now, but bright kids didn't do. I mean, even being a doctor was for people who couldn't handle concepts. Kids at my school who were going to be doctors were usually people whose fathers were GPs, and they were going to inherit the practice. It was in my. I said, Ernst Mayr said I was a Lamarckian until I was 25. I said, Ernst, I only became a Lamarckian when I was 25. I only heard about evolutionary theory then. Anyhow, it's interesting. I wonder to what extent our genetic background, I mean genetic in the sense of historical backgrounds, has in fact influenced the way that we think about these things. Is it all, I mean, are we having a really serious discussion? Or is this all some kind of, addendum or whatever it is to the way we were brought up?
Thank you for that, Professor Ruse. I have a question which potentially could take this discussion in a different direction, but I do think it's an important one to cover. Professor Ruse, would you agree that even if intelligent design is a pseudoscience, certain ideas in intelligent design could potentially be valid and transform our entire way of looking at biological life? Or is your position that every idea articulated within ID is invalid simply because it is ID related?
Well, I'm not sure. As I say, if it depends, of course, how far ID is going to go. I mean, if you want to say there were, 3 or 4 interventions, do you want to say, though, that there were interventions, as I say, every Friday? So one of the things is I'd need to pin down exactly what the bits and pieces are, which, quite frankly, I haven't thought about in the last at least 10 years, if not 20. because for me, at some level, that's not important. I mean, there's clearly enough evidence to make for a naturalistic theory, even if Bill thinks that the evidence isn't really as strong as it should be or needs to be. But as I say, for me, that's not really where I'm at. As far as I'm concerned, evolutionary theory is true. If you want to add some miracles to it, that's up to you. I don't. But as I say, I don't lie awake worrying that, oh my God, Bill Dembski may be right about trilobites. Trilobites, said he proudly.
Okay.
I've got 5 kids, and I was the first one in the family to get a tattoo. I think my sons could have wrung my neck when they saw that I had beaten all of them to that. Mark you, I didn't do this except when my wife was away. And it took a week after she got back before she talked to me, but that's another matter. No, but as I say, somehow what's worrying Bill or what's worrying, Philip Johnson, it did at one point. I mean, of course it did. I mean, I certainly worry about 6-day creationists but I don't think Bill's a 6-day creationist. I mean,
I'm not.
I really don't think that Bill worries about, that there was light on the first day, but the sun didn't come into being until the 3rd or 4th or whatever it is. I think you're enough of Augustinian to say God tempered the wind or the metaphors to the, non-literate Israelites. But that, as I say, that's not really where I'm at. Of course, the other thing we haven't talked about, which I would take seriously, and again, reflection of my Quaker background, is the moral issues. I mean, to what extent does Bill think that, let's say we're talking about the Ukraine, and the question is, Israel is in certain respects. Let's take Israel. I mean, 1,200 Jews were killed. The women were raped, genitally mutilated, and all of those things. What's the right reaction for a good person at a time like this? Is it really to do as the Israelites have done, go in there and kill 20,000 people, most of them women and children? That's where I'm at. Now I want to know where your religious beliefs lead you on that. I mean, I grew up as a pacifist, and yet somehow I agree that the Second World War was a good war. It had to be fought. Hitler had to be stopped in a way that I don't think anyone, I certainly don't think the First World War, I think the First World War is bloody stupid. But the Second World War, Hitler had to be stopped. And, you could have a compromise like my father. He wouldn't fight, but he worked with Italian prisoners of war, freeing other people to go and fight. That's where the really important issues for me are these days. What about you, Bill? I mean,
well, let me, I don't mean to sound snarky, but, you wrote a book with E.O. Wilson in which you said that morality is an illusion fobbed off by our genes to get us to cooperate.
But if illusion, I don't think that morality as such, I don't think it's illusory that you shouldn't stamp on small children when you meet them. What I think is illusory, the belief that this is based on something like the Platonic forms, eternal and never changing, and that sort of thing. I think it's all, I'm a naturalist. And I think morality is an adaptation, just like hands and eyes. But it doesn't mean to say that hands and eyes aren't important any more than I think that morality is important. But you're right. If I do get into the Oxford book Dictionary of Quotations, I'm sure it will be Michael Ruse said that morality is an illusion, because that haunts me.
Yeah, but I mean, but I don't want to let you off too easily, because it does seem that as to say that it's an illusion fobbed off by our genes that, it's the result of, you can call it an adaptation, but it's the conditions of our evolutionary past. So as those conditions change, our evolution and our morality can likewise be adapted. So who's to say that, given our place in the current evolutionary scheme, raping women, killing infants is not a good thing? I just I think even Steven Pinker at one point was saying that, for instance, mothers killing their infants could be a good thing in times of drought, so that when there was times of abundance, then she and a new child could survive. I mean, that's again, I mean, I think it's, yes, that will probably go into a book of quotations, but I don't want to let you off too easily on that.
Yeah.
Well,
if I could
let me off, but here we are, a bunch, let's say 50 people, hunter-gatherers, and there's a drought or something like that. Well, ongoing. We cannot afford to have 50 small children that we've got. It's going to come to an end. So I don't like infanticide, but I find it difficult to condemn that. Or, let's put it the other way around, leaving, they just leave people like me and they go on and I'm left to starve or to die. Is this morally wrong in these situations? Well, that's the kind of question I want to talk about and I want to worry about. It's like the trolley problem. I want to worry about whether it's okay to change the switches so that the train goes down and kills one person rather than 10 or something like that. But it's my choice. Or is it okay to switch it like this, but not to push a big person? You look skinny enough. I don't think you'd be very good, but not to push Donald Trump over and stop the train that way. Anyhow, so those are the sorts of issues I do want to worry about, and that's the kind of issue where I think I think that if you could show me that I'm wrong to talk in any sense about illusions, then I think you made a point which is important to me. But as I say, I want first for you to notice the context in which I'm talking about illusion, because I'm not saying that it's an illusion that we shouldn't rape small children, because that's not illusory, at least in that sense. Anyhow.
Okay, thank you. We're just coming to an hour, so I just want to ask one last question to wrap up the discussion. We are, of course, talking about this book, Debating Design. It's a 20-year anniversary. So the last question to both of you is about naturalism. There's been a lot of discussions about how naturalism, intelligent design proponents would say, is propping up evolutionary theory, and some evolutionists agree to that, some don't. Ruse, Professor Ruse, you've always been known to be quite candid in terms of speaking on both sides. How would you view naturalism and its relation to contemporary Darwinism?
Well, I mean, my feeling is, that naturalism is thinking that this is a world governed by laws, and the way to discover the nature of this world, even how to live in it, is to find those laws and how they're connected. I mean, I don't see. I'm not trying to use naturalism in any esoteric sense or anything like that. As I say, I don't equate it with materialism, because I'm not. That means everything is just dead material. I don't think I'm committed to that. Anyhow, over to you, Bill.
Yeah. I mean, naturalism, I take it as a metaphysical position that nature is all there is, whatever you mean by nature. But what that would preclude is any sort of anything outside the naturalistic system impinging on it. And that would include supernatural, God, designers of the sort that we're talking about typically with intelligent design. And I think as a consequence of naturalism is what's been called methodological naturalism or methodological atheism, which is that science must be done on the assumption that nature is all there is and there are no external influences that could impinge on nature. And it seems to me that that is an open question, though. It could be that nature has certain capacities and nature will then exhibit things that are beyond the capacity of nature. I mean, there are, for instance, computational problems that are beyond the computational resources of the universe. I mean, Seth Lloyd, quantum computationalist, has calculated, I think, about 10 to the 230 computational steps. So what if you have a problem that requires more than that, and yet you can confirm that it is solved? That would suggest a reality beyond the natural world. So I'm just giving that as a thought experiment, but it seems to me naturalism, methodological naturalism, end up being arbitrary restrictions on our science. And again, I keep coming back, science versus science. Ultimately, this is a scientific question for me on intelligent design. The philosophy, the theology are in some sense downstream from that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Ruse and Dr. Dembski. I would love to see a second edition of this. I mean, I didn't give my view on this. I mean, the only takeaway lesson from this book that I got is that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of design. that was my takeaway from this. So, thank you, both of you, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. All the best. So,
nice seeing you, Bill.
Nice seeing you. I hear you're going to see an opera coming up shortly.
It's Nabucco, the early Verdi, and I always cry when the Jewish prisoners, sing lament about their homeland. With everybody else, and it's the one time in opera where you get an encore. They sing it, and then they sing it again. That's heaven. Okay, folks, I'm off.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Take care.
This is a lot more fun than I thought it would be.
We should meet at a university sometime again and try to do a debate.
Okay, well, maybe so. All right, bye, folks.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. So, Sabur, thank you for taking the time and making this happen.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't actually get to ask some very important questions. I'll let you guys. I'll let you guys just. Are you okay for time if we do a quick sort of wrap up?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, they were actually. I didn't even cover some of the main questions here, but I think what you guys covered was actually far more important. There is one thing that you said, which I thought was really important, and I wanted to get Professor Ruse's view on this. But I might as well get yours. And this is something that you said on page 329. So this is in regards to the logic of intelligent design and the way that there's an unfairness in the way the evolutionists set it up for failure. So it's page 329. Oops, I've got the page wrong. Okay, so I'm going to have to wing it because I had the actual quote ready. But what I'll do is I'll read out another section I wanted to cover while I find that. So this is something which Stephen Myers, has spoken about, and this is going back to page 388. The causal powers that natural selection lacks, almost by definition, are associated with the attributes of consciousness and rationality, with purpose, intelligence. Thus, by invoking intelligent design to explain the origin of new information, design theorists are not positing an arbitrary explanatory element unmotivated by a consideration of the evidence. Instead, design theorists are positing an entity with precisely the attributes and causal powers that the phenomena in question requires as a condition of its production and explanation. So I really wanted to get Professor Ruse's view on, the origin of new information, but might as well get your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Well, I think Stephen Meyer, he's saying this is the only causal power we know that creates information. You have all these examples in human contexts. and then we see the same sort of information arising in biology. And so what is the source? And it seems that the Darwinian mechanism is not adequate to account for it. And in fact, I think these papers were written 20 plus years ago. I think subsequent work, especially on conservation of information, indicates that if you try to account for that sort of information through an evolutionary process, it had to be in some ways front-loaded into it. So you never get around that information problem. These evolutionary processes can't create the information; they can merely shift it around.
Yeah. It would be interesting to find out what Professor Ruse would have said about that, but I don't think there's been any progress in terms of the answers that they usually give when it comes to the origin of new information. So the actual section I wanted to read from the section of the chapter that you wrote was: the way things stand now, evolutionary biology allows intelligent design only to fail but not to succeed. If evolutionary biologists can discover or construct detailed, testable, indirect Darwinian pathways that account for complex biological systems, such as the flagellum, then intelligent design will rightfully fail. On the other hand, evolutionary biology makes it effectively impossible for intelligent design to succeed. According to evolutionary biology, intelligent design has only one way to succeed, namely by showing that complex specified biological structures could not have evolved via any material mechanism. In other words, so long as some unknown material mechanism might have evolved the structure in question, intelligent design is prescribed. I wanted your thoughts on if anything's changed in this.
I would say not much. The sense, I mean, if you're putting your hopes in some mechanism, some unspecified material mechanism to bring about biological complexity and diversity or some particular system, how do you refute that? I mean, if it's enough to posit some possibility, the space of those possibilities is so large that we cannot exhaustively go through them and rule them all out. So I think that becomes a problem. So again, I think we are set up for failure, not for success. I would say if you could find a detailed evolutionary process to bring about something like a bacterial flagellum, and we're talking step by step. I mean, this is, genetic changes, they get instantiated in new proteins. I mean, this would be a very long sequence. This is not just finding an intermediate like Archaeopteryx between reptiles and birds. At that point, I'm not sure that would refute intelligent design, because so I think I would weaken what I said there, because you'd have to look at what was the process that was then involved. I mean, was it natural selection that was guiding everything? And even if it was or if it's some form of selection, if you look at evolutionary computing examples, the fitness is always carefully designed. So even there are ways of slipping design into the Darwinian mechanism. This is, again, the whole point of conservation of information, that we can it's looking for design in the process rather than in the products of evolution. And, when I wrote this 20 plus years ago, I was focused mainly on the products, but its design can also be in the process, and we can assess the design in the process. So I don't want to make it too easy for the Darwinists to refute design. So I think that's a change.
Okay, excellent answer. There's a prediction that Elliot Sober makes in his chapter, which is that I expect that human beings will eventually build organisms from non-living materials. This achievement will not close down the question of whether the organisms we observe were created by intelligent design or by mindless natural processes. On the contrary, it will give that question a practical meaning, since the organisms we will see around us will be of both kinds. How did this prediction pan out from your perspective?
It hasn't. I mean, I think this is something James Tour has been talking about with origin of life questions lately, and challenging origin of life researchers if they can solve certain fundamental problems, and they haven't. So this, it's, I think the question, if we're able from non-living materials, and what does that even mean? Does that mean we're going out to an open field of rocks and grabbing things there? Or are we going to a chemical supply company and saying, please give me a bunch of RNAs and nucleotides of various sorts, purified in concentrations that we would never see in nature, and then let me build something? But even with that, an example that my colleague Jonathan Wells has given is, if you take a cell and prick it and then let the materials flow out, you've got everything you need for life. Now put Humpty Dumpty together again. I mean, even that hasn't been done. So it's not a question of even just grabbing inorganic materials and then forming them into life, even if you've got everything required for life, but it's in some ways disorganized so that you've lost the organism, you've lost life. It seems that we can't put it back together again. So the challenges, I think, that face the materialist, the naturalist, are very significant in all of this.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've addressed that in quite a comprehensive way. The difficult question I was going to ask you, and obviously Professor Ruse, I can't ask him now, but the difficult question I was going to ask you was something that Robert Pennock wrote in the conclusion of his chapter, which is essentially that comparing, the intelligent design ideology to Lysenkoism. So what he says is the Communist Party denounced the Darwinian view in favor of Lysenkoism, a variant of Lamarckism, that was more in line with party ideology. Biological research was set back for a generation. Ideology could have the same effect in this country if it succeeds in its lobbying efforts. So, these types of statements are not uncommon amongst evolutionists when they're challenging intelligent design proponents, that if intelligent design does get through, we are going to be set back by a generation. What would your response be to that?
Well, I think there's quite a disparity of power between us and Lysenko. I mean, Lysenko had Stalin backing him up and enforcing this. So intelligent design, there's not going to be any enforced ideology. If anything, it's the Darwinists. I mean, they rule the academy. I mean, my colleagues in the intelligent design movement, we're lucky if we get tenure. I mean, I don't know how many instances I know of people who have not gotten tenure, have been demoted or lost their academic positions. So I think, on the question of just power, we don't have it. So we have to, if we're going to win this, it's going to be on the merit of the ideas. So, so this seems to me just an incredible comparison with Lysenkoism. It's interesting. I mean, this was also written, again, I mean, the book was published in 2004. In 2005, there was this Kitzmiller v. Dover case, which, was a political setback for intelligent design. So again, it made it necessary for intelligent design, if we're going to win this on the merit of the ideas and the research. And so I think in some ways that's healthy, but in some ways I think it gave undue power also to people like Pennock, so that they can keep pushing their views without the corrective of intelligent design.
Brilliant. Okay, the last question, which is going back to a statement which comes from A Devil's Chaplain, which Richard Dawkins speaks about the future of Darwinism. He says, Darwin may be triumphant at the end of the 20th century, but we must acknowledge the possibility that new facts may come to light, which will force our successors of the 21st century to abandon Darwinism or modify it beyond recognition. So with the extended synthesis, you can say the second evolution of Darwinism, and with all the sort of challenges that the Darwinists are facing by, say, the third way of evolution, the proponents, which are neither intelligent design proponents nor the classical Darwinists. Where do you see the debate currently about the actual efficacy of the mutation selection mechanism?
Well, I think the mutation selection mechanism still is textbook orthodoxy. It's still what people are going to say if they have to put up a united front against especially intelligent design people. So to say that evolutionary theory may have to undergo some massive revisions. I mean, I've seen that sort of language from Francisco Ayala. There were some interviews that Larry Witham did with in the early 2000s, wrote some interesting books on evolution and Darwinism. He was a reporter with the Washington Times who was interested in these topics. And so in that, I think one of the interviews, Francisco Ayala admitted that evolutionary theory really needs some massive changes, some good new ideas. And yet, when he writes Darwin's Gift, it's as though Darwin just nailed this problem, and it's all the loose ends have been tied together. Everything is fine with the ship of state. So I think that's what so often happens. That's you present the united front that everything is good with the House of Darwin, but then when you can talk privately, you admit that there are warts on the theory. And so this is obviously a political move, but it prevents real flow of ideas. And it's interesting also that you bring up the third way. I've had conversations with James Shapiro, who's one of the leaders in that. He's a University of Chicago molecular biologist. And it's interesting, in private conversation with him, he's even more negative of Darwinism than I am. I remember talking in his office, and I said, well, I thought Darwinism, the idea of selection was useful. It inspired evolutionary computing, which is a branch of computational intelligence. And when I turned the conversation over to him, he thought that Darwinism was uniformly negative. It was just the worst thing that happened to biology. And yet, he's not going to go with intelligent design. He has this notion of natural genetic engineering, where organisms basically engineer themselves. And there's some merit to the idea, but the question that I've posed to him for over 20 years is, how do you get organisms that can do their own natural genetic engineering? Because it has to start somewhere. And he always punts on that. He never will address that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Dembski, for your time. Is there any last message you'd like to give to wrap up this discussion with Professor Ruse?
It was a delight to see him again. We still disagree, but it seems that he's softened in his old age, and I'm glad to see that the materialism that I thought he was wedded to is a bit softer. So anyway, but thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that we have other opportunities to talk, and as these ideas move forward and hopefully impact the culture, these ideas for intelligent design will ultimately win the day.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure having you on the channel, and Professor Ruse as well. So until next time, Thank you very much.
Thank you. All the best.